Welcome to another episode of AI Captain. Today we're talking about establishing an AI Center of Excellence. Adopting AI at the level of organizational transformation requires a cross-functional team of experts. And an AI Center of Excellence's ongoing and iterative relationship with AI stakeholders can help streamline strategic and tactical execution across your people, processes, and technology in a well-governed, inclusive, and harmonious way. Let's jump in.
WWT presents AI Captain.
Yeah.
Kept it in the
and I would say before we think about AI enabling it, and maybe this is AI, in a certain sense, like more in a neural network semantic search sense. Like when we talk about search within our current website, we don't have semantic search today, right? So we're using a Lucene index.
Yep.
We're doing text-based search, and so we know that there's deficiencies there. The Lucene index that we use is Apache Stoller. Apache Stoller actually supports vectors and vector similarity search. So your traditional software developers, like what we've done on our team traditionally, is kind of get it to a point where it's good enough. Mm-hmm. And now that we're building out this AI Center of Excellence, now we've got some data scientists coming over to the team, and they have a different kind of mindset when it comes to search and understanding like all the different tuning parameters, right? So even with Lucene, with text-based search, there's a lot of parameters that you can set, a lot of tokenizers that you can use, and splitting up your n-grams into all these different tokens. So bringing the data scientists in to help us kind of think about it a little bit differently, and getting search to a point where not only is it semantic, but it is just kind of better and more pleasing to all of the users.
On that side thing, I was reading an article yesterday, and they were talking about how everybody's more or less kind of jumped into trying to do vectorized search, and you're leaving behind 10, 20 years worth of we'll call it regular search that has a lot of good things, to your point, and maybe a lot of them haven't even been touched. But you have advantages there, typically around speed and some aspects of relevancy that could be your first cut before you then maybe move into the next. So don't hit the full-on vectorized search at the onset. Maybe take advantage of this, and then kind of go into the next layer once you have your
and I think the new hotness is hybrid search, right? So, and we're doing hybrid search today within our WWT GPT. But again, we're doing that outside of the system, right? So trying to take that same approach into the system, so that it's that blend of vector semantic search with the text-based search.
I think that also addresses one of the other questions that we're grappling with, or it starts to anyway, from a user experience standpoint. So on the one hand, we say, hey, we want one place where you can go to be able to access all these things.
Right.
But on the other hand, it's like, well, so a lot of times what you want is in the context of where you are. So if I'm on WWT.com, I'd like to be able to start up a conversation there that I know I'm already in the context of something, versus being in a place where it's wide open and I might have to say, hey, I have a question about WWT.com in order to kind of get the right answer.
Yeah.
So then it becomes, AI embedded, and then an ability to AI orchestrate if you have a full-on enterprise system that has that.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a greater need or expectation for performance, when it's embedded into a website or a mobile application. People tend to, maybe have a lower expectation of speed when it comes to a chatbot today, because they know of the limitations that LLMs have. But if we focus on fine-tuning, the search and getting it to a point where it has all the data that we expect, it has all of the fine-tuned parameters that give us the right results at the top. Okay, now we make sure that that's performant, and then we add AI on top of it. And the AI is just going to continue to get faster as new models come out.
You're talking about, that's this concept of trying to move the AI into the system as opposed to build it outside of the system. And in the early days when we were, starting to work on this, it was one of the things that I was, pre-COE. It was like, this seems odd that we keep going to different application teams and saying, give me your data or give me your content. and then you're taking it, and then there became a lot of inefficiencies on, well, what does this mean? Almost like you
Right.
said, we have to build, a prompt for the AI to understand SQL. You're having to have these people
Yeah.
ask, what do you mean by this? So this may be in the early stages, obviously necessary because we're trying to spin something up out of band with what other teams are working on. But the objective of a COE is to start to build the core knowledge and the practices that you're starting to formulate,
Right.
and then go evangelize that
Right.
into those systems to
Yeah,
achieve
so
what we
let's
just
talk
talked
about the AI COE, right?
Yeah.
So AI is Center of Excellence, right? Which it seems like we have started to use that word in recent
Liberally,
years, liberally. I think the concept has been around for a long time,
yeah.
right? And like thinking about the first team that I ever worked on here at Worldwide was our B2B integration team, and it was what I would consider a center of excellence. But I think there's a couple of different models for center of excellences. One is kind of that outsourced model, where I think the B2B integration team was an example of that, where it's kind of the specialty skill set. We don't expect everyone in the company to understand EDI, for example. And so we're going to, we have some EDI needs. We're going to go to that team. They're going to build it for us. I think that follows our model that we have today for predictive AI, right? So talk about machine learning, talk about the learning curve there is to understand how to build these mathematical models, right? Is pretty high. So that's not something we're expecting everybody to understand. Right. So when we have a predictive AI need, we go to that team. They're the ones building it. It's kind of that outsourced approach. What we're trying to do with the generative AI Center of Excellence is make it more of a enabling Center of Excellence, right? So there's a core set of features and components that are needed for the entire AI to have a consistent interaction point, so that users have a consistent chatbot, a consistent framework for plugging in agents and plugging in data sources, things like that. So there is a component here of kind of building out software features that everybody benefits from. But then one of the bigger objectives is to enable and democratize AI, generative AI, throughout all of our delivery teams.
Yep.
And so as we think about that, going back to our discussion on APIs and kind of enabling search on your API where the API exists, I think that becomes a good model for going out and working with these teams, so that it's not about jumping into a team and saying, step one, let's grab all your data and put it out somewhere else.
Right.
Step one is actually let's make sure that we understand what your data is doing today, like what APIs you have, how are you enabling that data within your application context, and then figuring out do we need advanced search for some of that data? Because we had a hackathon last week, and we saw, I think most of the projects had an AI component to them. And so there was actually a good use case here where one of the engineers, who's actually one of our newly hired COE members, he built out a framework, right? So he built out a framework that allows APIs to be plugged in, to an overall AI ecosystem, right? And interacting with that API through a chatbot. And so he actually built that for our interview. So we were going through our interview process for the Center of Excellence, and one of the things that we're asking all of our candidates to do is to actually come with a presentation, right? So walk us through, do a deep dive into your experience with generative AI. And so he built out that assistant framework for that interview. The cool thing about it was, in the hackathon, he presented his project, but there was another project that started to use it. Right. And so their use case was order status. So they were able to easily take their API and plug it into that framework, and now allowing the LLM to provide all these new use cases for asking about orders and things like that. In the case of orders, typically you have an order number, right? So it's maybe a simpler use case than what we're dealing with web content, right? When you talk about web content, where that's where semantic search becomes really important, and there's all these different words that might mean the same thing or have the same intention behind them. Whereas when you're trying to get an order status, it becomes a little bit simpler in terms of how you query that order. There's a lot more data, and more important data maybe in some people's minds that comes out of that API. But you might not need full, semantic search on top of an order status engine.
Yep.
So I think, it's working with each team to understand their data and how you best interact with it, so that way we can enable it within the overall context of the AI.
A couple other things. One thing you've been very intentional about, which I appreciate, is that the COE, as you've advertised it, is there to turn what anybody might be experimenting with into standards and best practices.
Yeah.
And a lot of times we see the misuse of a COE as, you need to come to me and ask me for permission to do this, because there's too much at stake if you don't get it right. So I appreciate the fact that you've said, we've intentionally said, hey, this is a big enough area that we want everyone to start skilling up. And so we leave some of that time through hackathons for people to play around with the ideas. And by virtue of even the act that you put of hiring is kind of show me how you do these things, and then they build on each other. Now we can take that example and bring it in, study it, and establish some standards so it can be repeatable and maybe a little bit easier for some of the other teams to then pick up, while we now pick up the look at the next thing. So that I think is has been beneficial and critical to the success, or will be critical to the success of the COE. I think then the other thing we've done intentionally there is said that any business teams that are that have ideas, we don't want them to necessarily come, nor do we enable them to come directly to the COE to say, build this out of band of that. We say, you still need to go through the standard prioritization process of, is this worth our time, money, and effort?
Absolutely.
And then we post up the existing business analysts and the product owners with the stakeholders on that, and then work with the COE and the rest of the development team, because we don't want to saddle the COE with now operating everything that they build versus teaching through that process. Yeah,
we don't want the Center of Excellence to be a gate, for AI, because there's so much out there, and there's so many people experimenting with it, and that's great. We want people to see what those experiments are, going to turn into. But we also want to do things right. And so I think when we talk about the Center of Excellence, there is a lot of rigor that goes into, the ML ops side of things, right? So making sure that we have models that are able to scale and are easily accessible. I think the future at Worldwide is a library of models, so that people can choose the right model for their use case. And when it comes to our current strategy is using Microsoft Azure to host those models. Right. What we're trying to do is build out access into those models in a way that is governed and, has the right level of, cost alerting and cost reporting, maybe hopefully a way of putting a tiered system in place so that, we can have maybe lower tiers of access for experimentation and then higher tiers of access for production applications. There's a new set of kind of cloud management guidelines that we're working on in order to make, AI and the LLMs available to everybody. And then, beyond that, I think it's trying to provide a set of, tools that allow teams to practice responsible AI. So making sure that, whether the AI is internal or externally facing, that it is answering questions in a way that, number one, don't promote violence or hate speech or any of these things that, could be detrimental. So making sure that the AI is kind of answering questions in a professional way. We want to make sure that those answers are on brand, right? That they follow kind of our brand guidelines, but also that we prevent, people from exposing AI solutions that are, prone to jailbreaks or prompt injections. There's a lot of nefarious use cases for AI, and we want to make sure that that is not what our AI is used for. So there's a lot of kind of security, mindset and kind of cloud governance mindset that we're trying to instill within our team right now. And then, as we become mature from a Center of Excellence standpoint, go out and bring it to the other teams. And there's a term, I'm not sure how much it's used anymore, but going out on safari. So that's kind of how I see this team evolving, is that right now we're spending a lot of time just getting the team staffed up and kind of started. But once we get to a mature place and we have these kind of foundational offerings, it's going to be, like you said, working with delivery teams, taking people from the center of excellence, putting them out on Safari, and helping to enable the delivery teams to hopefully have an easy button for
Yep.
generative AI.
Yeah, at that point, over time, we probably end up being probably similar to where we have a database kind of engineering team who's making sure that everything is set up properly, is being
Yeah.
used properly by application teams. Probably a little bit broader than that, but I mean, and we have yet to see where all this will evolve, but that would be the case. I think the other part that people might, if they're doing COEs, might run into these particular challenges would be with our SaaS tools. So
Yeah.
the two that come to mind, one would be, for us, we use Salesforce and their Salesforce Einstein. So there, I mean, our approach has been that, it's not necessarily the COE guiding and directing that, but aligning with. But then the Salesforce team, as well as the stakeholder, know what their outcomes and their desires are. So help them to set up the POCs and keep tabs on that. Part of that, though, is can we do it, is there something that's more differentiating that we might want to build it ourselves? Or is it something back to the API thing that now we can AI enable that and then add some orchestration, and et cetera? So that creates, I guess, again, that impetus for not being a gatekeeper, but an enabler with awareness. And then the other one that we're now looking at is around Copilot, in the Microsoft space, but also with their Power Platform as a low code, which is a different COE, because we want to use that as a means of enabling teams. But when it comes to the AI capabilities, we want to encourage the embedding of that in some of those low code solutions.
Yeah.
But to also say, does it make sense to call, enable an API call from that low code into something that we've built, and then start to gain more advantage.
Yeah,
through
and
that.
vice versa,
Yeah.
right? And so one of the questions we had this week was, how can we start introducing Salesforce content? Sorry.
Getting choked up about it. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's-
I'm still getting over this cough. They finally gave me steroids yesterday, which is,
I noticed he looks starting to bulk up
yeah,
a
yeah,
little bit.
yeah.
Good.
It's helping. So one of the questions we had this week along those lines was, how do we start introducing Salesforce content into our WWT GPT solution?
Yeah.
And if you think about Salesforce, so, if you're not familiar with that, it's a, CRM solution that helps you track opportunities with your customers, track all of your leads and your contacts at the customers. And there's a lot of data out there. We do not want to replicate that data into our systems. When we talk about Salesforce Einstein being their solution, I know we're working through a process right now to get the licensing in place so that we can start using that. But my sincere hope is that we have access to their APIs that allow us to inject, the Einstein APIs into our custom solutions, and then vice versa, right?
Yep.
So if Einstein is the solution that you're interacting with within a Salesforce context, and you want to ask it a question, about, WWT, can that interact with our system?
Right.
I'm not sure if that's a possibility, but that would be my hope.
Yeah. So we talked about COE not being a gate, but obviously there's the opposite of that would be pure pandemonium, and you're finding out about things all over the place. So where's the balance? How do you think you'll be able to strike that with the team?
So, I think for me, it goes back to, kind of understanding those tiered systems, because while most people can go out, we don't have any restrictions right now we don't block, OpenAI's website. People can go out there and use it and experiment, and I'm sure people have, paid subscriptions to that. I'm sure people have paid subscriptions to other, LLMs that are out there. But when you talk about scaling that, right, like it's one thing to experiment locally. It's another thing to take a solution and bring it into production, right? And there's a lot of cost associated with these LLMs. And so I think in a certain way, there needs to be, a pipeline that people can request access, into these, production grade LLMs, right? And that's what I think our center of excellence is going to be enabling is, self-service, ideally self-service access to request API keys, to understand what your model library is and which models are available in a production context. And then, working through it that way, and making sure that we have all of the reporting and, guardrails that I mentioned earlier in place so that teams can feel, secure. But I guess the other thing that it brings to mind, is, and this goes back to your point of, having the Center of Excellence work with the delivery teams. It kind of makes me think about the build versus buy conversation,
Yep.
right? And so that's something that has been a hot topic recently, where maybe there are certain solutions that we are experimenting with and we get excited about and, we make a decent amount of headway with, but then at a certain point understand that this maybe isn't a differentiating factor for us as a company. And maybe there's a third-party solution out there that, does it better or in the long run will be
Right.
cheaper. I'm curious what you would think about that.
I guess there's a lot in there. I mean, first, semi-jokingly, if every vendor said that they want to add $20 per user per month for every AI capability, it would probably be cheaper to build versus buy. But that being said, I think in some of these cases, we may pick something in the early days because, pick a particular project, AI project, because we don't see anything on the horizon, or it seems like a fairly straightforward use case, and we're still trying to get our feet under us as far as like how you would do something. So it's easier to pick that versus go somewhere and say, well, first we've got to clean up all of the content, et cetera. But I think to your point, once we have to be wary of the sunk cost component of, well, now we're going to use it because we spent so much time on it versus this group over here, this vendor over here provides a full-fledged solution. They're pouring a lot more time, money, and resources into it. And so the cost benefit becomes the right kind of analysis that says it makes more sense for us to, buy that particular capability and bring that in. Typically in some of these scenarios, it's also a place where it's a stakeholder, an internal stakeholder who already doesn't have a big solution platform already. So what we're getting is not just the AI capability, but the foundational capabilities, and then it makes a lot more sense because we're not building the non-differentiating core capability. Therefore, we're also taking advantage of the AI capability that comes with it.
And I think revisiting that conversation frequently is necessary because we see a lot of these companies out there marketing AI, right, and their AI solutions, and when you start using it, they're not always very good, right? Now we might really love their foundational software, right, and we're happy with that. But when you start looking at the AI features, they're not where we want them to be. And so in a few examples, like we've started to build out, some AI solutions that maybe were intended to fill the gaps there, right? And I think one of the questions that we've been talking about in terms of, ongoing build versus buy decisions is, does this require, information that is proprietary to the company, or, is it a unique enough feature, that differentiates us, as a company, versus maybe some of these third-party solutions. And I think Salesforce is an example of this, right? Where you have, a CRM solution that's got a lot of maturity, a lot of data in it already. We're not going to attempt, to go up against Salesforce and build our own AI-enabled CRM system. But then, for even some of the systems that are less mature than that, trying to reassess frequently, like where their AI features are compared to, where we might be able to go in a custom sense.
Yeah. I think the other thing, I mean, if you take a step back, as we engage really on the general IT buy versus build, we all generally have a level of comfort of we've been there, done that. We've built systems, so we know what goes into them. Yeah. We know what goes into operating them and all that sort of thing.
And the long-term maintenance.
So when we engage in the negotiations on what price point are you putting that out versus what is the value, we have a sense of what do we think that is, and that enables us in those kinds of discussions. So here, with this being so new, I guess that's where I'd say, even on the the case of kind of starting to play around with contracts and from a legal standpoint,
Yeah.
and saying, well, we don't have a bunch of legal experts. That's not our bread and butter, so that might not make sense for us to go build. But playing around with it enough to say this is what we see,
Yeah.
gives us a sense of what's the value of what you're saying the price point is.
Yeah.
And that, I think, helps us. So I guess that's the encouragement for anybody that's doing this, is there may be a number of things that end up on the floor, the cutting floor, so
Yeah.
to speak. But the experience that's gained through that, especially if you've accelerated it, helps you in navigating when you're also being thrown a lot of, hey, buy this, buy that. And you can kind of, with a more experience under your belt, say, no, I don't think that's going to be a major differentiator. It's not going to be an upside versus the cost.
Let me pick your brain on a feature that we were talking about building. And I think we might still want to build it.
Even if I say I don't like it? All right.
Yeah. Even if you don't say you don't like it, and even if it actually exists in a third-party format.
Okay.
Right? So Microsoft Copilot has a feature within Microsoft Stream
Yeah.
where you can go in and interact with those videos.
Uh-huh.
Right? So you can basically chat with the video. It has the full transcript
Transcript,
there.
yeah.
It can summarize it. You can ask it questions like, what did Kevin say in this meeting, right?
Yeah.
It's pretty great. But when we look at our ecosystem, right, we have a plethora of, video services out there that each kind of have different use cases. And so when I say, a plethora, I mean so Microsoft Stream is typically used for internal video hosting.
Right.
We also have, WebEx for most of our corporate meetings are held using WebEx, right? WebEx now has its own system for
Right.
transcripts. We also use Microsoft Teams for a lot of corporate meetings and also meetings with external parties. And then on our website, we use a mix of YouTube and Vimeo for hosting those videos, right? So now when I look across all of those, we have probably 5 different solutions that might each have their own AI, behind the scenes. But when we start thinking about our customers, and people that are visiting our website or interacting with our, events, right? So we do a lot of EBCs, so executive briefings that might be on site, might be external. We do a lot of field events. And as we record these events and, have the events available within, our website or, in other tools that our customers are accessing, I would like to provide that same capability to our customers.
Right.
Right. And so that's where I guess where my head is right now is it might still make sense to build a solution there that is ultimately a kind of copying some of these capabilities that we see in third-party solutions, but with the intention of kind of bringing it all together into a single use case
For the external.
for the external users.
I think that doesn't. I think that aligns. I should say, I put it more positively. I think that aligns with the earlier conversation as well, in 2 parts. One, if you looked at it more generally of, hey, we want to be able to, internally get transcripts, both externally, internally, et cetera. The best case solution is that each of those is AI/transcript enabled from an API perspective, and you could orchestrate out
Exactly.
that. They're not probably there yet, but they're probably getting there. That seems to be evolving very quickly. But then you kind of brought on the other one. Now I want to encapsulate wwt.com from a customer standpoint
Exactly.
in a way that it can be AI enabled, of being able to provide any transcript, et cetera, even though those are from source systems, in which case that does make sense. It's a differentiator because of the package. You wouldn't want to say, well, if you want this, go over to YouTube or
Right.
Vimeo. So I think that on the litmus test or the smell test, it passes some of our principles that we've started to align there.
And maybe the way I'm thinking about it is kind of a hybrid approach where, we might build the, kind of common interface, but I don't want to build the system that creates the transcripts, right? Because the transcripts are already out there, right? And so we're doing this today with some of the content on WWT.com that we're feeding into our custom AI, where we are pulling the transcripts, in this case from Vimeo. But thinking about a common service that could understand YouTube, Vimeo, WebEx, Teams, and Streams, and bringing all those transcripts into the same, kind of API that then you could allow the LLM to be able to chat with.
I think that still also makes sense in the context of you're trying to build, in essence, a database of video transcripts.
Exactly.
Versus leaving them all in their source repository.
Exactly.
So,
yep.
yeah.
Cool. An AI Center of Excellence serves as a global hub that consolidates AI expertise across different business units, ensuring that AI initiatives are coordinated and aligned with the organization's overall strategy. It's one of the most important enablers of AI success. We hope you learn more about why and how you can create your own on this episode of AI Captain. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. And don't forget to tune in next time when we talk about the limitations of AI in understanding complex data and the potential future of AI in business intelligence and data APIs.